So, Doug, there are four main elements of mental toughness, of the mental toughness concept, and one of them is challenge. So can you explain what you mean by challenge and why it might be important?
Great, yeah. And it's one of the most exciting bits of the development of the concept because it's got its roots in the work of an American called Suzanne Cabasa, who is kind of the forgotten heroine in all of this. She actually came across the concept, identified the concept, and people pretty much ignored her until we and others were able to come along. But I think we've got under the skin of the concept. And basically, what she was doing, she was looking at resilience. And, we've often spoken about how resilience and positivity are the two sides of mental toughness. And she had a kind of belief that the more resilient you were, the higher up the organization you went. And she decided to kind of investigate it. And that's what she found. But to her surprise, she found that that wasn't the only thing that was going on as people went up an organization. Not only were people more resilient, but they would put their resilience into play. And she called this challenge. In other words, they would take more risks than anybody else. And so she began to understand that there was something about this idea of challenge that was bringing an element of positivity to resilience. So she said, resilience isn't enough. You've also got to be able to face the future and believe you can do something about that future. And so she created this notion of challenge, which we picked up. Now, when we first started working with the mental toughness concept, we more or less took on board her idea, her explanation of challenge. And we were working with senior leaders in organizations, and we found out basically what she found. But bit by bit, we began to understand that there were two components to challenge. One is something we call risk orientation. So, we don't live our lives in the past. We use our resilience to deal with the consequences of the past. We live now and in the future, and the future is uncertain. It's unseen. We often don't know what we're going to step into. We just know we're going to have to do something different. And for some people, this idea of doing something different or different new feels like a threat. Mm-hmm. For another person with exactly the same skill set, background, and knowledge, the future can sound really exciting. I want to go there. And we had a very good example years ago when I worked for a company that was planning to expand into Japan. And we brought a team of people together, all of whom had all the skills needed to go and break into Japan. Half of them couldn't wait to go to Japan to see what it was like. Half of them just point blank refused to go because they didn't want to go step into a foreign country, deal with the difficulties of being in different language, different culture. Yeah. But they were exactly the same type of people. So what we understand is risk orientation is about the mindset that enables me to embrace uncertainty. And some of us have got it, some of us haven't. Mm. And then we started to work with senior leaders in organizations. And by their very nature, they're in charge of steering the organization. They're in charge of looking forward. And they pretty much do what you expect. They go and experiment, they come up with strategies and plans that, talk about developing new markets, developing new products. And that's what they should be doing. But sometimes when they do it, it doesn't work. In fact, it's pretty much the case that nobody ever gets it perfectly right. Even Richard Branson talks about he started some like 30 businesses and only 5 of them ever succeeded.
Mm. And he was a massive risk taker. Some would say his success was due to the fact that he was a really high risk taker, didn't care. And just by the law of averages, I suppose some of them will land and some of them won't. Yeah. And it was his risk profile that created his success. But it could also be work really against you, couldn't it?
Yeah, but what we'd also find is when those projects failed, and this is obviously what Branson didn't do, sometimes people would say, that didn't work, bin it, forget it, we're never going there again. Others would say, hang on, why didn't that work? Let's look at it a bit more closely. Should it have worked? What could we have done to make it work better? Next time we do something, can we learn a lesson from this? And that's when we began to realize that the other part of challenge isn't just taking risks, it's learning from everything that happens. Every time you take a risk, you are actually creating a learning opportunity. So some people are very reflective. They will ask those questions that are set out before. They'll say, well, that happened. It might be not happened to me. I watched Penny do something and it didn't work. I wonder why. Let me kind of work it out. And so some people will be very reflective, that spend time trying to work out what had happened, how they could do it better. And often their focus would be to find a solution. They're very solution orientated. Whereas you'd have just as many people who would adopt the opposite approach. Forget it, bin it. I don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
And so what we now know is that the challenge element consists of those two factors: risk orientation and learning orientation.
And for both of those, risk and achievement, that they both require some change, some optimism, some hope. But so in my mind, you can't face any challenge without having to change something in some way. And most people, in my experience, resist change. They're not massively. Most people want a safe, comfortable, predictable life. And then there are some people, probably me, like people like me. Again, I thought everyone thought like me, who love change, who love to mix everything up, have a go, take some risks. Yeah, I'll learn from it, whatever, I'll crack on, and get really excited by the idea of something new and different. But that does require change in some, I mean, everything changes. You can't ever stay in the same place. So what's your thoughts on resisting change?
Well, in my experience, all of the factors in the mental toughness concept are normally distributed. In other words, there is always a small number of people who will adopt one approach. There'll be a small number of people who will adopt the other extreme approach, but most people will be in the middle. So when it comes to change, what we find is a small proportion of the population will resist change. They do not want any difference. They want to keep going the way it's always gone. You have generally an equivalent small proportion of people who just love it. If the day doesn't bring something new, it's a boring day. In between, statistically, you'll have around 68%, almost 70% of the population will have a bit of both. And basically their approach to change is not to resist it, but just to wait to be comfortable with it. But the trouble is that the people who are very much up for change will often label those people as resistant to change.
You see, you've just exactly nailed it, because I'm in the 30% of people who love change. I mean, even as a kid, I used to change the furniture around in my bedroom constantly because I just wanted it to be different every day. And that took that through my whole life. So I love change. And you've just pointed out, I'm making an assumption that people resist it. And it's just because they don't think like me. But my attitude to risk was always quite high as well, because I knew that whatever happens, I'm going to learn something. I'm going to discover something. And I love that possibility of, finding out stuff I don't know about myself. I like being uncomfortable. I quite like out of my comfort zone. And again, in my experience, I think I'm in a minority, because most people will stay as tightly in their comfort zone as they possibly can.
Well, and you are right, what you're illustrating there is the upside of being change orientated or up for the challenge, and that is you will get to places other people don't get to. You will do things other people don't, and people might even envy you for what you do. But the downside is very often you see everybody else as being somehow not like you. And of course, that's the diversity and inclusion issue here, because you find that at the top of organizations. I've very often worked in organizations where senior leaders have tried to implement change and they think that they have explained it to the workforce when they say they describe the change. What they're not doing is showing people how to adjust to the change. And on more than one occasion, in several occasions, I've heard senior leaders saying they're against me, they're trying to stop me, and they're not. They're just waiting to be comfortable about what's going to happen.
Yeah, and this is when that treating everyone as an individual, because everybody's different, everyone will respond mentally in a very different way to the person next to them. That's why that is so vital, isn't it? That you don't treat everyone with, one size fits all.
Yeah. The other thing about one of these factors, learning orientation, is I sometimes describe it. I mean, all of the 8 factors are equal in importance, but I talk about it being a beating heart of the mental toughness concept for this reason, in that there is research to show that, like other aspects of our personality, our mental toughness comes from a combination of genetics. We've inherited some of our mental toughness, and experiential learning. In other words, we've learned part of our mental toughness through our life experiences and through the guidance and the shared life experience of others. That's learning orientation. So here we have a component of mental toughness that is actually significant in the development of mental toughness. And so to have a degree of learning orientation is the key to developing your mental toughness. Now, you don't have to develop your mental toughness, but if you have a high degree of learning orientation, we think you've probably got a more than 50-50 chance that you will develop over time. And we do see that there is research to show that generally between the ages of 25 and 65, people develop their mental toughness very slightly over that period of time. And that has to be reflecting your life experiences as you go along.
And there's a bunch of people, is there not, that are very consciously aware of the risk they took, that they did something, or they didn't go their way, they learned something, but they then repeatedly make the same mistake over and over.
Yeah. And that's because they're not taking time to reflect and learn from their experiences, or even from other people's experiences.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And again, self-awareness, of course, is fundamental to understanding this. Look, Doug, as ever, a brilliant insight into challenge and why it matters so much when it comes to mental toughness. So thank you. If you'd like to find out more about mental toughness, there's lots more information, more podcasts, all available at these links.